Stay connected to your project teams anywhere, anytime.
Electrical's 10 minutes ahead of you.
Not for long.
Huh, you caught up.
I always do.
Start collaborating. Download a trial of Bluebeam Review for 30 days at bluebeam.com/collaborate.
When the Barnes Foundation and the Gantt Center were commissioned, they were conceived as standalone buildings. They began with a blank slate. Nothing was on that site. On the other hand, the Nelson-Atkins Museum opened in Kansas City in 1933 in an imposing Beaux-Arts style building. Decades later, the museum wanted to expand the collection with a complementary addition. And did they get a building that matched the look of the existing museum? Not exactly. The best way to understand the Nelson-Atkins Museum and the new Henry Block building is from a distance. In this way, one can see the two very different visions: the original building and the new wing. Greg Sheldon and Casey Cassius are with BNIM, a Kansas City-based architecture firm that managed the construction process. What was the building assignment?
Well, the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art had a new vision for the future. They realized that they needed more space to be able to display all of their collections, and they wanted to put themselves on the map internationally with kind of a landmark building.
Many high-profile buildings start with a design competition, with invited architects submitting proposed designs. Stephen Holl and his firm know this process well.
Well, it's a typical process. Architectural competitions, 150 architects apply, they boil it down to 6, and then they give them 2 months and $50,000 and ask you how to do it. And the rules said that you had to add on to the north, and you couldn't go anywhere else on the site. And then we decided to break the rules and go down into the landscape. This is all connected in the landscape, and come up with these lenses that come up through and bring the light down and shape your view, but leave all 4 elevations of this exposed.
And he wanted to put it on that street going down to the side of it and make it very modern. He didn't want it to fight with the original building, because it's beautiful architecture, and anything you add in front of it would kind of ruin the architecture. So he thought it should be completely different.
It's almost counterintuitive, because you have this building and you think that the best way to be deferential to it is to maybe copy it or mimic it, but in fact they do everything the opposite.
Exactly the opposite. When the building was first announced to the public, there was a lot of commentary about that, and there were a lot of people that felt that the correct solution would have been to imitate the old building. But when you really start to look at it, I think the way to be most respectful of the old building is to let it stand for what it is and to make a completely new gesture on the site.
The block building addition is comprised of 5 connected buildings, each with its own galleries, or what Stephen Holl calls lenses. The addition is buried into the landscape. It isn't below grade and it isn't above grade. And by doing this, it doesn't overpower the existing museum.
I can find every drawing for every project that I've ever done, because they're all on 5x7 watercolor pads. That starts in 1977.
Unlike most architects, Stephen Holl doesn't start a design by sketching with pencils and pens. He uses watercolors.
So you ask me about a project, and I can go to the year and go to the box and then find the drawing. For example, here's the Nelson-Atkins Museum. Now, we've already decided to go down into the landscape, but I'm thinking, what are the ideals? the ideals of connecting to the landscape, light, open and inviting, freedom of movement. So you can see that the process isn't about painting, it's about conceptualizing. The concept, you can write words on here, and you see a lot of bad designs too, really terrible stuff. I would never, you get up in the morning, you have a bad day, don't show anybody, right?
And how long does it take typically?
Anywhere from a day to 6 months. But after I have the idea, I can tell you exactly how long it's going to take.
Stephen Holl's work is inspired by some aspect of a building site. He calls it anchoring. This approach ensures that each building is unique to that site. And it's why each new building looks different than the last. Architect Chris McVoy is a senior partner with Stephen Holl Architects. How does site inform your work?
Site is critical to the concept for every project, and that's one of the reasons all of our buildings look different, is they're specific for that place, that site, that place on the earth. And here, it's a very active urban site. You can see the subways, all the activity, and you have the playing fields. So the building is kind of pivoting between this urban context and the playing fields opening up. So we made this space suspended up in the air, overlooking the whole city and all the fields. And it really gives you a sense of a new perspective on the city. Architecture can do that. It can reframe your understanding of your context and your city by making a new kind of space with new perspectives.
On your sketch, I saw you say something about the stone and the feather. What does that mean?
That means that this building, these are kind of what I say, complementary contrast. This is stone, this is, I call it the feather, this is glass. One of them is heavy, one of them is light. One of them is 1933, one of them is 2002.
So this is one of the really special moments where you get to look out and see the old original classic building next to the new design concept, where you really see that kind of chameleon glass next to the stone. The landscape is here, and this is the plane, that the lenses would come up and actually be fused with the landscape and be one. And so the idea was the space in between the buildings became outside galleries. And so here we are in an outside room, so we really doubled the amount of gallery space by creating the sculpture park on the outside of the building.
So people come out on top, they can look at artwork, but underneath that, there's a building.
Yeah, there's a whole nother gallery directly below us. The building is actually effectively 3 football fields long, all below grade. And so you think about that, but then you see these small scale lenses, and it really breaks it down in a scale that's very human friendly, and it's not this big hulking mass that it would have been otherwise.
And what does it feel like at night?
Oh, at night, it's just, I always use the word ethereal, because it's just this soft glow that just envelops you. And it's just really wonderful, and it just gravitates and just pulls you in.
For this new wing to be successful, the existing landscape design had to be seamlessly integrated with the new. So what is the role of the landscape designer? Now, the architect for this building had this idea of this rolling landscape in between these lenses. So you've got these 5 lenses in this rolling landscape, but the site is flat. So how did he achieve it?
Well, Stephen, instead of building the building into the landscape was actually constructed around the building. And to give you a sense of how that is, this model is a model of the adjacent landscape. And you can see the relative shallowness of the terraces. And then this other model is a slice through the landscape of the new building. And you can see that it's much higher and much more energetic. The landscape is actually built up to cover the building.
So what we're really seeing are the lenses that are popping up, but in all of this green here, there's building there.
Yeah, exactly. What's different about this building is that instead of there being a building and a landscape, on this project, they're one and the same.
To make the building feel like it's growing out of the earth, the architects came up with a visual detail between the lens and the ground. The way that the building meets the ground is always a challenge. How did you deal with it here?
So it's really critical in this building, and we always thought about this as, if you will, the grass to the glass detail, and we wanted to make it as minimal as possible. So we came up with this detail where we put a stainless steel gutter in, and we actually collect the water, and we get that 8-inch lift from down below. It really creates this really crisp, clean detail that really sets the building off and allows the lenses to just spring from the ground.
So you've got rain, the rain just goes down in the gutter, it doesn't destroy or damage the glass.
Right, exactly.
So how does the block building use these lenses to bring in natural light?
The lenses are a translucent glass, structural glass, so there's no framework. It's just abstract light, a kind of block of light, like a block of ice. It comes down through this, what we call a T-wall, through the curved undersides, which refract the light down into the galleries. And you see how there are these, what we call flutters, openings between them that mix north and south light. So you always have the cool north light and the warm, direct south light of the sun.
So this shape is bringing the light down like a scoop.
Exactly, cupping it and bringing it down into the galleries. So to get the right quality of light in the space, we test many different glass types. And you can see here, these are two different types. This is Ocalux, which is clear straws perpendicular to the glass, and that pulls the light through and in.
One of the things I like so much about the museum is the quality of movement. It's so effortless. And it's really because of this ramp. We're just slowly descending down with this ramp down into the gallery spaces. Now, in a lot of museums, you need a map to figure out where you're going. Here, we just follow the path down. This gallery sequence is so interesting. We don't really walk in a straight line, do we?
No, the building bends and folds in plan as you move down through the landscape.
And there's certain moments where you can then look outside.
That's correct, that's correct. You get the translucent glass here, which is typical for the building.
Those are very strategic, right?
Very strategically chosen.
When you let someone look out, you want them to see something.
Those weren't accidentally chosen. They're very deliberate in each case.
I like the way you've brought the light this way, but then why do you tilt the wall that way?
The wall's tilted in both directions. You can see here and here, so we can mix the light that's coming in from the north and the south sides to get the best balance of color for the art.
The balance matters.
The balance matters. It matters. Artists often like to paint with north light, so if you get nothing but south light, maybe that's not a good thing. It won't simulate the original conditions under which it was painted. By blending it, you start to get the full range of color.
It has the quality of a kind of a magic lantern. I mean, why does it have that quality? How'd you do that?
It does. This is a low iron acid etched glass, and it's really a perfect example. The building, many people say, is as though it was actually built out of light. One of the ideas was that the light on the wall would blend into these dark surfaces on the floor and above on the ceiling, so the room is luminous throughout.
One place where the lens and the outdoor meet is in the gallery, designed for the sculpture of Isamu Noguchi.
This is one of the most sublime spaces in the building. The original design conceived of taking the zipper spine that you see out there, coming right on in, taking these two fountains that are behind us, the sculpture here, and having them go right out into the landscape. So it's more this notion of the landscape being fused with the building and the glass being very transparent and coming through. And then this space being scaled for these 7 specific pieces.
And knowing Noguchi's work, he likes to connect often to the outside. This is the one moment where it seems that the building is really embracing the outside.
That's absolutely correct.
When you think about architecture, you can think about it in different scales. There's the big scale, intermediate scale, and small scale. You can also think about it in terms of design intensity. So for example, the big scale, that's the big idea. That's the glass lenses in the landscape. That's pretty design intensive. You can also look at details like this handrail. This is kind of the small detail, but this requires a lot of design intensity as well. And then you can take the intermediate scale. That is the rooms or the gallery spaces. And here they purposely pull back. They say, we want to be very quiet. The architecture should really be subservient to the artwork. Now there's one other detail that's not in the actual museum, but it really brings together both the old and new wings. It's a new parking garage and reflecting pool.
I was thinking of a vast hall, very tall, where the concrete structure is very special, and there's water, there's skylights in that pond, that big pond that's in front, and those skylights bring the light down to the parking below. Later, that became One Sun and 34 Moons, the Walter Di Maria piece.
This used to be parking.
Yes, it did.
Right? And now you've turned it into a proper drop-off, and there's a beautiful fountain.
There are these elements that you can see, the rings, these oculi that are essentially skylights to let shafts of light down into the parking garage, and they're combined with the sculptural piece that represents a shard of the sun. So by day, the shard of the sun glows in the sunlight, and by night, these rings are illuminated and they glow like 34 moons in the bottom of the pool.
Now light is coming through those holes in the ceiling through a shallow layer of water, and the sunlight is coming through and creating this magical effect on the ground.
Absolutely. It's the surface of the water that's rippling in the wind that creates this dancing light on the floor of the parking garage. And it was interesting that when the parking garage first opened and before the cars came in, students from the Kansas City Art Institute across the street would come over with blankets and picnic baskets, spread them out in the dancing light, and have a picnic lunch.
it was very intentional.
Dana Knapp was the director of planning with the museum. She worked between the client, architects, and consultants. She understood that this was a big undertaking. How many consultants did you have in this job?
Wow, I can't say that I ever counted them, but I think on this project, maybe at its height, it was around 50. From art storage consultants to envelope and glass consultants, security consultants. So we really wanted to get it right, and that expertise was invaluable.
Now that it's done, the new challenge is bringing in visitors. When you move to that sequence of lenses where you're moving down and the galleries are tilted this way and that way, you feel kind of as if you're being sort of engaged and pulled into the architecture.
Totally, and I think that is the flow that drives you in, and at the same time allows you also to discover if gallery as an independent section of the museum. And it is also the way of reaching out to different communities that little by little start enjoying the museum, understand that it's free, understand that also they can come on their own terms, spend quality time, and that there's something that they can enjoy every time they come.
Stephen Holl referred to a quote that's written on the back of the original museum. The soul has more need for the ideal than the real. And he used that as inspiration, not to follow along with the original concept, but to design the new wing in a different way.
The experience of a building is something that's inside the spaces of it. And that's how we live in a building. That's how architecture changes the way we live, not to look at it. So I always felt that a building has got to be a lot more when you go in it than when you look at it.
Well, for us, it works because Stephen has such a care for art and a real passion. So I think in this commission, and my predecessor, Mark Wilson, who was working with him in designing the program for the building, got the best of both of them.
When you walk down the hall and look up, and it's pretty incredible. And yet it doesn't detract from the other building, which is really what they wanted.
Satisfying, I think, is a good word. And now to see years later, not only the recognition of the project, but also, people moving through it and responding to it in a way that you had hoped.
It's working.
It's working, which is always a good thing.